Because Orpah goes, okay, it's been, monologue. So we're in the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. Entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. That's a very strong declaration from someone who was not Jewish. She's a Moabite. By Naomi's tradition, she's a Gentile. But Naomi goes, yeah, I'm not going to fight this one. Okay, come along. Might have been not quite that flippant, but... So they get back to Bethlehem. And everybody, the family is excited to see Naomi. Because she didn't just marry Amalek, she married his parents. She married into the family with his brothers and his cousins and his nephews and his nieces and everyone. You get the aunts, the uncles, everyone. So the whole village is excited to see Naomi back, and Naomi goes home and excited about me. This was a bad thing. She says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. And we know the rest, we know the story where Naomi sends Ruth to go glean in the fields because she couldn't go out and work. That was the best they could do to get something to eat. There was a relative of Naomi's husband of great wealth of the family of Amalek. His name was Boaz. So Ruth goes and she gleans in his field, and instead of falling for the young guys, it actually doesn't say that she had a great affection for Boaz, but she didn't go wandering after the young guys. And now here's the part that catches my eye, and we tend not to fiddle with it a lot here in the 20th century. Chapter 3. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? So she tells Ruth she gives Ruth this ritual that to our American ears sounds really weird, but she does it. To her Moabite ears, it may have sounded really weird, but she did it anyway. She gets herself washed, she puts on the perfume, puts on her pretty dress, sneaks over to the threshing floor. After all the guys have finished their work, they've had their meal, they've had a little something to drink, they wander off to find places where they can't hear each other snore. And she knows where Boaz goes to curl up next to them. Walks over mother-in-law sees just this big old sack of grain that she's brought home and says, "Don't you worry, he's going to take care of this today." And here comes the even more interesting ritual. Boaz, this is in chapter 4. Boaz goes up to the gate, he sits down, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz had spoken. By the way, Boaz says, "Well, I'd love to take care of you for the rest of your life, but there's somebody who's a little closer in relation who has the right to do it instead of me, if he so chooses." So Boaz sits down and he says, "Hey, you know, Naomi's come back, and I'd like to redeem her land, but you have the right to do it first." And that guy goes, "Oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I'll pay for it, so that Amalek's land stays in Amalek's family, because when they left, they didn't sell out the land; it was theirs, an inheritance given by God when the Israelites landed in the promised land." And Boaz goes, "Oh, and you remember there's this Ruth who is the wife of one of Amalek's kids. You're going to have to marry her and have kids with her in Amalek's name." And the guy goes, "Oh, this may not be my best option. Tell you what, you go ahead and do it." To our ears, this sounds really goofy. As a property gets sold, you move, I bet there aren't too many people in this room right now or looking online who have stayed in the exact same house from birth to grave. It is just our nature as our culture to move around a bit. The concept of an inheritance that lasts for endless generations is not the most common thing to our ears. But that's what God had set up. In fact, if we go back to Leviticus, could somebody please find Leviticus 25, verse 23? And I'll make somebody else read it because I've been doing too much talking. Let's wait for a mic to get to you so that the internet folks can hear you. Thank you, Matt. And also go through 23 and 24.
I'm reading from the New International Version, Leviticus chapter 25, verses 23 and 24. The land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers. Throughout the land that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land.
So that's where we get the idea of the kinsman redeemer, because only somebody within that same family was allowed to basically reimburse Naomi for getting it, so that she had a little bit to live on, and it did not leave the family that was originally immigrated from Egypt. And so that's where all this passing around of shoes and things like that came from. The idea that the land had to stay in the family. And that's a neat thing, that we have a God who thinks in terms of Mm-hmm. Yeah. But, so within the story of Ruth, this custom that the land the land cannot be sold outside of the family because,
Verse 25, if one of your fellow Israelite becomes poor and sells some of their property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they had sold.
and the other thing that also gets me about the story of Ruth, so this idea of permanence, this idea that God wants us to always be with him, and for us to remember that he was the one who brought us into his kingdom. It's his land that he granted. So you know. So Boaz and Ruth get married. Naomi's happy about this. Ruth and Boaz have a baby who they declare as a descendant of Amalek. Don't ask me how that one works. And so here's the other part that catches my ear. When they're blessing the baby in chapter 4, verse 12, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar, another Moabitess, bore to Judah because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. Now, could somebody please read chapter 4, 18 through 22?
Ruth chapter 4, reading from verse 18 through verse 22. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Zenron. Zenron, the father of Ran. Ran, the father of Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz.
We know Boaz.
Boaz, the father of Obed. Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of David.
I find it really interesting that the author is putting emphasis on how there were two Gentile women in the family line of David. Tamar and Ruth. Isn't it neat how God wants to include everybody? He doesn't want us to think about Gentile and Jew. He doesn't want us to think about, this way we segregate ourselves or that way we define, limits upon our own societies. He wants to include us all. That's a neat thing. Let's take a quick peek at Esther. There is a lot in Esther. Yes, sir. Mr. Leonard, behind you.
Before we move on, I think it would be helpful to realize or examine again the story of Ruth.
Okay.
We kind of miss the drama between Eliphaz and Boaz. Tradition. It didn't happen easily. There was a contest. Now, Eliphaz wanted to hold on to his inheritance. I haven't read the story in years, but as I remember, he wanted to hold on to his inheritance. And that was the obstacle between him marrying Ruth. And tradition says that one of the things he had to do, I don't remember whether it was Boaz or Eliphaz, but they had to take off the shoe. That was a tradition of the remission. So we missed a lot of details, and details are important.
Okay.
Now, the whole story is about obedience, faithfulness, and finally, prophecy.
I agree with the prophecy part because we're talking about the family line that goes to David and down to Christ. That I absolutely agree. So the verse you're talking about with the inheritance and the shoe is in chapter 4, verse 6. And the close relative said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm anything, one man took off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was confirmation in Israel. Therefore, the close relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. So he took off his sandal. And Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Amalek's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Maon, I have acquired as my wife to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brethren and from his position at the gate. You are witnesses this day. And all the people who were there at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to you, to your house, like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel, and may you prosper in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Can we get the mic to you real quick? Yeah. That way the folks online can hear you, because you're making a good point.
In recognition to what Brother James was saying, this is the levirate law that the Israelites practiced when an inheritance of the dead was passed on. Boaz is an example of that. Mm-hmm. So it's being perpetuated so that the line of Christ, like you stated, would include those who were not of the faith of Israel. So their inheritance would be perpetuated through the levirate law, and the ancestry of Israel would be kept on.
Continuous.
Yeah, continuous.
So another female heroine in the Bible is Esther, a pretty famous one. Now, in this case, Esther is by lineage Jewish, of the faith. And her family has got carried away in the captivity around about Nebuchadnezzar. They end up far from home, and about 3 generations later, that's when we're seeing this story happen. It's actually, because you see because they list in the book of Esther the lineage of Mordecai, who is, let's see, she was Mordecai's uncle's daughter. And they list, they actually put it in there. And they, well, it's very important, because it's very important within Jewish tradition to remember all of the family and all of the lineages and all the trees and the hedges and the bushes that families become. So, and in this case, we're seeing a story of how God rescues his people in the most interesting ways. We start out the book of Esther with the context. It came to pass in the days of, I am going to mutilate this word, Ahasuerus. He was a king over, or a king in Shushan, the citadel, and he ruled over like 121 provinces, and it actually mentions from India to, where is it? Shoot. India to Ethiopia. Now we have a foggy clue where Ethiopia is. We have a foggy clue where India is. This was a pretty big stretch of land that this one king was ruling over. He had gathered together folks from all of his provinces so that he could impress them tremendously with how he was king and you need to pay attention. So he kept them in his court for, he was in the 3rd year of his reign. He made a feast for all his officials. I'm reading in verse 3 of chapter 1. The powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes and the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 181 days in all. So they couldn't go home and take care of their provinces. They had to be there in the king's court for 181 days. And then they had the 7-day feast at the end of that, which also niggles my ear. It was a 7-day feast. It sounds like they're still using the week-long cycle that the Jews used. Doesn't that sound like that to you? So the times that the Jews used, all the pagans were using too. Well, we know the story where the king gets a little bit sloshed, orders Vashti to come before him. Vashti goes, and the king asks all these princes and nobles who are assembled before him, well, what should I do to the queen? And they go, well, if this gets back to the wives in the provinces, this is going to be bad for domestic harmony other places, so you need to put her away, essentially divorce her. It's not quite, I don't think it would be quite a Henry VIII thing, but somebody else needs to be queen instead of Vashti. And the king goes, I can live with that. So then they assemble a group of all the beautiful young ladies of the provinces, and he going, hey, I like this idea. And at night, they go in to see the king, and in the morning, they go back to another house where they're going to be a concubine for the rest of their life. And if the king ever remembers their name and calls for them, there you go. Esther, who we find, let's see, okay, so chapter 2, verse 7. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So the decree goes out, and Mordecai goes, okay. And Esther gets taken into the court. But he put it in her ear, you don't have to mention you're Jewish right off the bat. That was kind of it wasn't one of the primary things she mentioned on her resume when they first went in. When she goes in, she attains favor with the head eunuch, who puts her in a really nice apartment with 7 servants, gives her all the best beauty treatments and all of the best suggestions for how to get along with the king. And it works. Her night comes, she goes in to see the king, morning comes, he makes her queen. Might not be quite that simple, but so that's the part of the story that we're all really terribly familiar with. A little ways after that, Mordecai is sitting by the gate because he's keeping an eye on Esther. Now, mind you, he can't go directly in because nobody gets to go see the king's women. And while he's sitting at the gate, he overhears a plot to kill the king. So he gets a message to Esther, who gets a message to the king. And the king is very grateful. And it's even recorded in his books that Mordecai did this. Later one night, now, and we also hear about Haman, the villain Haman. Chapter 3, after these things, after Mordecai has saved the king, after these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. So he's a head guy. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. And this ticks Haman off. And this ticks Haman off so badly that not only does he want to kill Mordecai, he wants to kill every single Jew in all these 121 provinces. The concept of wanting to kill every Jew living ain't new. Hamas didn't invent it. So we know the story of how Mordecai gets the message to Esther that this decree has gone out. He says, look, you've got to go to the king and plead for our people. And she was like, okay, but I want everybody to fast and pray for me for a few days before I do this. Because this was a life or death move on her part. If one of us goes into our congressman or goes to the White House and goes, hey, Mr. President, nobody's going to kill us. No one can order us dead. If you wave a knife at them, that could be a little different, but still, just hi, how you doing ain't enough for a death sentence. However, back in this culture, if you annoyed the king, he could order you dead and nobody's going to say anything. Except, gee, wasn't that a bad idea? She goes into the king, and she doesn't just go, well, king, you know that decree that you wrote, it's going to kill me and it's going to kill my uncle. She invites him to a party. She invites him to a candlelit dinner. You know, sets the mood. Gets him happy to see her. And he accepts the invitation. And way back when, apparently it was not possible just have one dinner. So in chapter 5, verse 1, now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That was the third day after the fast. So she invites him to dinner. Haman comes to dinner too. After dinner, the king is very, very happy. I apologize. There's a lot of text here, and I don't have it marked out as well as I probably should have. She asked him to come to dinner. What I'm looking for is when they get to dinner. Chapter 7, yeah.
Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Verse 7, Esther replied, my petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question.
Okay, so the first dinner and then the second dinner.
The second dinner.
There we go.
Haman went out that day happy and in high spirit. And I'll move down to...
But then he sees Mordecai, and it's a big bummer because Mordecai's
Yes.
still not bowing down to him.
Yes.
So his wife says, well, tell you what, build a big gallows and you can hang Mordecai off of it. That'll make you feel better.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So chapter 7, the king and Haman are going to dinner with Esther again.
Mm-hmm.
That's on the second day. And the king's going, well, so what is it you want?
Yes.
I know you didn't invite me to dinner just to have dinner. What it is it you want? I'm happy with you. I'll give it to you.
Mm-hmm.
This is when, okay, so
Verse
chapter 7, verse 3.
3.
Then Queen Esther answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition and my people at my request.
Mm-hmm.
For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated.
Mm-hmm.
Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's losses. So the king answered and said to Queen Esther, who is he and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Esther said, The advisory and enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. He should know he planted enough of it. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Queen Esther was. Then the king said, "Will he also assault the queen while I'm in the house?" As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now, Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, "Look, the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman." The king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was subsided. God can do some really interesting twists. By all conventional wisdom, Mordecai was toast. Haman had all the power. Mordecai didn't. So if Haman wanted to get rid of him, he could. And here is God stepping in, using traditional culture to go, "Not one of my kids." Now, the law of the Medes and the Persians is one of the first places in history where we see that if the king makes a law, he doesn't just get to arbitrarily change it. So when they wrote it down and it was sent out as a decree, that was it. It was stone. You did not revoke it. You did not reverse it. The mercurial whimsy of the king did not apply once it was signed and sealed. So the fact that the king had signed and sealed that death order for the Jews meant that he was not legally allowed to completely rescind it. So here's what he does to get around it. He sends out another decree. He says, "Okay, guys, you've been told on this date of this day, on this month of this year, you're allowed to go kill whatever Jew you want. Guess what? The Jews are allowed to be armed. And they'll fight back." And in, chapter 9 of Esther, starting with verse 1, "Now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the time came for the king's command and his decree to be executed." That would be decree 1 and decree 2. "On the day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred, in that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. The Jews gathered together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king," I'm not going to mutilate his name yet again, "to lay hands on those who sought their harm. No one could withstand them because fear of them fell upon all the people." I'm going to pause just there for a second. When was the last time? So the Jews were not the martial class. They were not the noble class. They were the slave class. But there was a fear of all the Jews on the people. I have a sneaking suspicion God had something to do with that. Mr. James?
You know, this is another one of those that I haven't read in a while, but I remember in the scripture, just about this time, Mordecai had gained favor with the king. And this had significant influence on the king's general population. And of course, I know you're going to get to it, but by the end of the chapter, Mordecai became second in the kingdom.
What you're referring to, because I read it a couple of times last night. The king was restless one night, so he had the royal scribe come in and read him a book of all the things that had been happening in court lately. And somebody read where Mordecai had saved the king's life. And the king goes, hold up a minute, what did we do to reward Mordecai? And the scribe goes, well, it doesn't look like we did anything yet. And the king goes, Well, as timing would have it, again, I think God had a little to do with this because he has a delightful sense of humor. Haman, the bad guy, comes in right about this time, has not followed the 2-second rule, or the 2-minute rule. If you have not heard a conversation for 2 minutes, don't butt in. So the king asks Haman, if I wanted to honor somebody, what would be the best way to do it? So Haman goes, oh, wow, he wants to do something nice for me. So he describes all these wonderful things that he wants. Well, let the guy wear one of your robes that you've worn before. Put him on one of your horses, and have somebody walk around and declare to the whole city of Shushan how you like this guy. King goes, I love it. Here, I want you to do that for Mordecai. Haman goes, say what? So that was the beginning of the relationship between, that was the next step in the evolution of the relationship between the king and Mordecai. First you had Mordecai slip some information about a death threat. Then you have, the king goes, hey, that's a great idea. And has Haman for his he won't bow down to me nemesis, has to shout, and the king likes this guy. If Haman had taken a second to think that one through, he might have had a change of heart. And then, yes, after the decree, after 2 dinners with Esther, then the king goes, this Mordecai guy's a good guy. We